Microphones should be muted unless you're speaking to prevent background noise. When invited to speak, unmute your microphone, and once you have finished, mute it again. Please use the raise hand icon to indicate that you wish to speak. Please remember to lower your hand again after you've spoken. Where forum members are required to vote on an item, we will conduct an electronic vote. If there are problems with the electronic vote, I will ask each member in turn to indicate verbally if they are for, against, or abstaining. If a forum member has not been present for the whole of the discussion on an item due to technical failure, they should not vote on that item. Are there any questions about the procedures that we will follow?
We've just had Ed Gwillam join us, Chair, so I don't know if you just want to check that he can hear us okay and we can hear him.
Ed, could you confirm, please, that we can hear you and you can hear us?
Yes, I can certainly hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you, we can. Thank you. So we move on to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence, please, Sarah Clark?
Yes, I have apologies from Julie Conn, Alex Davis, Georgie Griffin, Martin Henton, Tim Knapp, Tracy Neal, Sean Lyons and Norman Moon, and also apologies from Les Knight and Kerry Morgan this morning.
Thank you very much for that. Item 2, named substitutes. Are there any named substitutes?
So we have Lynn Johnson substituting this morning for Georgie Griffin.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Chris Lewandowski has raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. I declare an interest in the trade union dedelegation of facility funds.
Thank you for that. No more. Paul Deneen?
Same Paul? As Chris just
okay. Thank you, Paul. There don't appear to be any other declarations of interest. Item 5, minutes. So now we want to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 19th of March. Are there any matters arising that aren't dealt with elsewhere on the agenda? No. Please bring up the voting screen. If you were not present at the last meeting, you should abstain from the vote. If you'd now submit your vote.
Okay, and those have been approved, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, National Funding Formula Update 2022-23. I'd like to call on Malcolm to present to the forum, and Paul Jennings may wish to comment on discussion at the budget working group.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
There are 2 items in this particular agenda item. The first is the consultation with Herefordshire schools about the budget for 2022-23, and the second is a draft response to the DFE's consultation paper. All of these items in the paper have been discussed with the budget working group, with the exception of a new item on dedelegation for the behaviour service where we are concerned about the financial sustainability of the service. And just to facilitate Cameron, we've invited him along in case anybody has any questions about dedelegation of the behaviour service. We will be returning to the budget working group and schools forum for further discussions. So perhaps if Cameron could give a little 5-minute summary of the behaviour service and take any questions and why we want to de-delegate, that would be quite helpful.
Thank you, Malcolm, and Kathy, Chair, may I commend you on your very business-like processes. I must do the same in my own team meetings from now.
Thank you.
So I'm going to assume that you all understand the behaviour support team as it is and as it was, a small team of teachers, advisory teachers, who visit schools on a daily basis in term time to advise staff on particular children who have issues with their behaviour. And the team has been around a long time, and it's a well-regarded team. But over the last few years, it has a number of people have retired, and now it's down to 1.8 full-time staff. In other words, 2 teachers. Now, the sustainability of the service has been called into question, not just over the last 2 years with COVID, but because the team no longer sells a service level agreement to schools at the start of each academic year. Now they operate a pay-as-you-go system. In other words, if there's a child with presenting difficulties, the school will contact the behaviour support service and pay for an individual piece of work. The service isn't making money and will go, Les Knight has suggested the service will go in 2022 unless it can be given a new model and a new funding model, and Malcolm will talk about what he needs from you in that respect. The service, I won't spend too much on the rationale, but we don't have much in Herefordshire in terms of specialist services outside of mainstream schools to support schools with behaviour. The capacity of mainstream schools is a given, and schools are good, not so good, stretched, not so stretched in what they can do with children with behaviour and emotional difficulties, SEM difficulties, which is a special education needs, social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. And the behaviour support service is one, I suppose, one line in that continuum of provision between our mainstream schools at one end, which is where we want all children to be educated, and at the other end, our special school system, which is Brookfield, or if failing Brookfield, private or independent special schools that we often use as well. The longer we can keep children in mainstream schools, the better. And the behaviour support service is an element in that continuum of provision. If we lose the behaviour support service, like we lost the learning support service, we can't get that back ever. We won't be able to reinstate a group of teachers who are qualified, equipped and experienced in consultation and advice to schools. It's a particular skill, and it's a hard-learned skill. So today I'm here really to present to you some numbers and some requests for funding. Les Knight has asked for me to present the picture for you to subsidise the team, maintain schools, to buy a portion of the team's time for a particular figure. Malcolm, you'll talk about the amounts, I guess. So for the amount that Malcolm is going to ask for you, which is around £40,000 per year, you would get 113 days of behaviour support time. The academies wouldn't get that time, maintained schools would get that time, and they would get they would get 100 and, oh, sorry, let me work out my figures here. Yeah, they'd get 113 days free at the point of use. And that would be for individual consultation work about a particular child, individual interventions, which were highly regarded, that's them working one-to-one with the child, and a new item on their menu, if you like, which is workshops on anger management, emotional literacy and social skills, which they would conduct with each child and their TA coming to a central location for 6 weeks an hour a week to learn the skills that they can take back to school. So those would be the three elements. The other thing I should say is the behaviour support team every year trains schools in team teach, which is their positive handling, or I should say, put it in a broad terms, their method of restraint. And it's the dominant method of restraint that we use in schools in Hereford. And it's, as you may know or may not know, it's a method of managing children that promotes de-escalation in the first instance, but eventually prescribes certain legal holds and restraints and guiding techniques. And schools have to have this training, otherwise they risk harming children and breaching insurance and health and safety protocols. They're the only service that we have in Herefordshire offering that training. And if that's gone, it's gone, and we'll have to go to private providers. So that's a broad outline of what you would get as schools. Oh, I should say the 113 days is a small amount, and it's not enough for every school to have as much as they want. So the process of allocation time would be via criteria, which I will probably write with the behaviour support team, but it will be based on need. We all understand the highest levels of need, and the behaviour team would negotiate with you over each piece of work and access to the service, and they would be applying a criteria based on need, but also looking at the urgency on the patch at the time, and a process of negotiation would be agreed between you and them for involvement. It's envisaged that you would be able to access the service more with this extra funding than you can at the moment. The other thing to say about it is some of the time for the behaviour support service is offered to academy schools on a traded basis. So they will have to pay for all of the behaviour support services team. And if you feel generous today, you could offer more money to reduce the amount that is on offer, on a traded basis to the academy schools. You could double the amount that Les Knight's asking for and have twice as many days for yourself if you so wished. And then that would shut out the academies, which perhaps is unfair. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cameron. Does anybody have any questions for Cameron?
Yes, Paul.
Nikki.
I was going to do it through the chair. Just to say, I mean, particularly with the COVID situation and the mental health and well-being, I would have thought that it's an essential service, and anything that can be done to help and support young people to avoid them going to other units or whatever, or any help and support within schools to keep pupils in schools will be incredibly important. So I was in teaching for 34 years at a large high school, and I think any opportunities that are around that we can help to support young people at this very difficult time, particularly with the mental health and well-being, I would have thought would be very important to continue with. And 40,000 does not seem to be a huge amount of money in the entire budget sort of process, etc. So I would personally give my entire support to what you're proposing. I think if there's also additional help to academies as well, then I think that should be looked at, and probably the Budget Working Party would be the best group to look at that. But certainly in principle, I think that it's a very strong case, Cameron, and I would give it 100% support.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, just a couple of things, Cameron. Obviously, I would echo exactly what Paul says. We don't know the impact of COVID just yet. Obviously, there may be longer term impacts, particularly for younger children who haven't even yet come to school on the amount of time that they've missed out. Just a couple of things, Cameron. In terms of the hubs that we now got available, in nurture hubs, where do you see them fitting in your plan of action, or is that something you see as separate? Do you see them developing specialisms around this and supporting the local area, or do you see that as something that's quite separate, an addition, so to speak, to what you're already planning around the behaviour support service?
Thanks for the question, Steve. As I mentioned, the continuum of provision is fairly sparse in Herefordshire, and we have mainstream schools at one end and special schools at the other end. The nurture groups are an initiative to be somewhere in between, and they're a new initiative. And I think for the first couple of years, they need to grow, learn, and consolidate their expertise. I think in time, they should be offering outreach. But as you know, when you're in a classroom with a group of needy children, it's very hard to juggle everything and meet the needs of outside schools as well as that. So I think in the early days, they need to consolidate and grow, but in time, their expertise will be sought after and welcome in other schools. I didn't say that the behaviour support team will be supervising the hubs. So Rhiannon, who's experienced when she was working for the psychology team, she was experienced in managing nurture groups then. She will be offering, I think it's a number of days a year. Let me just find out. But we're top slicing some of the behaviour support team's time for her to manage the supervision needs of the nurture groups. So to advise them on assessments and nurturing practices and general organisation. And I think she'll be hosting some kind of hub event once a week or once a fortnight for them to discuss the shared issues. But yes, in time I do. I don't see the behaviour support team duplicating what the nurture groups can offer in time. I see them being hand in hand and together, probably still not providing all the support that's needed to mainstream schools.
Okay,
Thank you, Cameron.
So Cameron, sorry, just a couple of questions as well, Kathy. So where have you got the £40,000 figure from? You know, have you surveyed heads? You know, do we want more or less? Why is it 40,000 in particular? Where's that figure been plucked from?
I'll leave that to Malcolm when he comes on to answer in detail. But okay. It's just to say that that's the amount that will keep the service afloat. So if they can, they're trading, so they're still selling training. So yeah. The maintained schools will have to pay for the training. That's not free. So the casework is free, the workshops are free, and the individual interventions are free. But maintained schools will still have to pay for training, and the academies will still pay for all of the elements. And that's the amount at the moment that's needed to keep them afloat after their traded income, after the money that's going to be paid by Les Knight for supervising nurture groups. And there's a free project for early years children who have social and emotional mental health needs, which the behaviour team are also providing. So that's the least amount. As I said, and Paul's reminded me that it's a growing need and a worthy need and an important fundamental need. You could pay more. 40,000 is your entry level.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You know, if we got a baseline from other head teachers, you know, if there's a bigger need, then maybe that will help the group decide on whether we actually need to pump some more money in the early stages to allay anything from later on, you know. Just in terms of just the last couple of questions, if you don't mind. So you talked about allocations going to be through a criteria. Is that going to be through a panel sort of method in particular? Or, you know, if, for example, I've got a child in my school, I know what the criteria is, will it be put forward to the panel, like top-up funding, for example, is done?
Yeah.
Is that how you see it?
It's a really good question. And at the risk of sounding like an amateur, I don't know at the moment. But what I do think is it needs to be simple. It does need to be transparent, and a panel is transparent, but it needs to be simple and operational, and it's based on trust. So if I produce a simple written criteria, that would be something for the behaviour support teachers and the school to negotiate. And if a head teacher comes to me and can convey an urgent, chronic need at the time, I would be swayed by that. So I do think there's a balance to be struck between being transparent and just being responsive. So I do think we would have to look once a term. So I would supervise the behaviour support team, and I would look at the sort of cases they've taken on and see whether they have been responsive. But I think we all know between us what is urgent and what can wait and what can't. So I'm sorry to fudge that, but that would be the process.
All right, thanks, Cameron. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Nikki?
Hi, Cameron. I know I sound already like I'm trying to duck out of this, but I can't remember the last time any special school needed the behaviour support team, and we already have to buy in our own behaviour support, and we don't have Team Teach. We have to use Build accredited. So could the special schools be approached on a case-by-case basis here? Because we have, once the child is in our school, our own behaviour, our own funding has to, you know, provide stuff in excess of what the behaviour support service does. I'm not denying they're a very good service, but I have to spend over £2,000 a year already on price training, which is Build accredited, which Team Teach isn't. So I'm just looking budget-wise. Whilst I'll support colleagues to try and keep people in mainstream, at the same time I've got to look after my own budget, and we've got 50 odd staff that need training on specialist behaviour interventions, and we have never accessed the behaviour support service in my time here, which is 20 years.
True, and it's a question I can't answer. That's down to whether you're allowed to opt out from this group commitment. However, what I will say, Nikki, is that if mainstream schools are supported and their capacity is maximised, that is going to leave less pressure for you in the special system. I know you're a learning school rather than a social, emotional, mental health school, but we all have children that cross both boundaries, and you too get pressure to have children whose social and emotional mental health needs are difficult to meet in mainstream, and that's why they come to you in the end. So I can't answer the question of whether you can opt out. That's a question for your colleagues and Malcolm, I guess.
Malcolm, would you, before we come to you, Joe, I'm aware you're waiting, but Malcolm, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about the proposal yet because it's included in the school budget consultation. And the reason that we've raised it with Schools Forum today is we have to ask schools through the consultation for approval to de-delegate the money. There are two options which I'll come on to. One is for the sort of entry level that Cameron talked about, which is £4 a pupil, and the other is to put the extra money in, which I think is about somewhere £5.50 or so. De-delegation only applies to mainstream local authority schools. So special schools are indeed opted out. And if there was something that Cameron, the behaviour team or Cameron was offering that Nikki wanted, then she could arrange to buy that separately as budget or demand dictates. So all of the consultation from the de-delegation questionnaire will come back to the budget working party in December, and Schools Forum will decide in January. So today is just consultation. What we didn't want to do was add a question sort of secretively or through the back door to the consultation without Schools Forum being aware of matters.
Thank you for that clarity, Malcolm. Joe, thank you for waiting.
No, that's all right. Thank you. Just so everyone's aware, I'm representing school governance, so that's what the angle I'm speaking from. And COVID aside, I mean, but behavioural issues have been increasing over the years. I mean, I've been doing this for over 10 years. So it is a unit that's required. It is a unit that's, I know that my staff use and respond to and work well with. So in terms of Paul's original point, I think 40,000 as a budget item is incredibly good value for what we'd be getting. But my question to Cameron is, you've described what 40,000 looks like for you in terms of budget, and it still sounds a little bit kind of like attrition and sort of survival mode. I mean, have you scenarioed what the service would look like if you were given more money? Is it just an increase in time? Is it an increase in staff? Isn't it broader training? All of the above? Could you just flesh that out a little bit for me?
Good. For every additional £1,500, the service can offer 5 days more time. There's a point after which the time isn't there without employing new staff. I think a behaviour support, the salary bill of the behaviour support team at the moment is about £98,000. So if we can raise 50,000, or Malcolm will know more than I am, more than I do, and you probably know more than I do, the on costs for a whole teacher. But if we can get to over 50,000, we could employ another member of staff, and then you can increase the number of days by a much larger amount. It is about increasing the days, really. It's about offering. We're not looking at offering different interventions. We're just looking to offer those core interventions of training, and that's training in social skills, emotional literacy, cognitive behavioural therapy to reduce anger and emotional regulation, and of course the team teach. It's individual casework, observing children, watching children, talking to children themselves and parents, and talking to staff about the sorts of strategies that are going to work for those individual children. And then the intervention work, which is individual hands-on work with the children to support them to understand and grow their own emotional regulation skills. So yeah, it's not offering something different if you choose to increase the funding. It's just offering more of that same. And I think attrition is a good word. The 113 days is entry level, and you know, it wouldn't be too much to double that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. David.
Thank you. As a relative newcomer to the area and someone who's just taken on a position on the management committee of HPRS, could you tell me how kind of the behaviour service and HPRS connect together? What's the kind of overall jigsaw with this?
Thank you, David. I hadn't thought of that. So the behaviour support service traditionally have worked with mainstream primary schools and secondary schools. And there's been a little bit of upheaval over the last few years. The service was handed over to the Brookfield School. That didn't work. It was handed to the PRU service to manage. That didn't work. And now, sorry, the behaviour support element was handed to for secondary schools was handed to the PRU service, but they weren't able to manage that. That has recently come back to the behaviour support team. And so they're beginning to re-establish their presence in secondary schools. This money will allow them to be more prominent in secondary schools because the service has dwindled for secondary schools, and there is nothing between mainstream secondary schools and the PRUs at the moment. There's no behaviour support service operating there, and they've just started this I think since Christmas, working with mainstream secondary schools. So the behaviour support team won't be offering the service to the PRUs, but they will be offering that important outreach to support the capacity of secondary schools so that they aren't knocking on the door of the PRUs as much. The other thing is, of course, if a member of the behaviour support team have been working with a pupil, they can liaise and negotiate with the PRU service about about the appropriateness of referral to the PRU. So the PRUs are a limited resource, and they want to know that they're taking the most needy children, and liaison between the behaviour support team and the PRU will allow that good transition between school and them.
Okay, what I understand about what you're saying, that you don't necessarily work with the PRUs. You did make inference that the behaviour service had been with the PRUs.
Yeah.
It just seems to make sense that actually the behaviour service, behaviour support service would be more kind of linked up to a service that would be dealing with behavioural issues. That's why they've left mainstream school. I'm not sure. It didn't work before, but you know, HPRS has now been, it's gone through a restructuring. So wouldn't it be worth having a conversation to see how the two could work together, just to provide more capacity, shall we say, for your team, and therefore kind of iron out some of these funding fluctuations? I mean, I've got no vested interest in it because I'm from one of the academies, but it would make sense that there is some overlap so that we can get some economies of scale.
I agree. David, as long as I've worked in special education, which is over 25 years, it's been the holy grail. to have a PRU service that offers outreach to keep children in their mainstream schools. What we've always wanted is them to build the bridges to keep the children in the schools in the first place, because it's a fact of life that once a child leaves a mainstream school to go to a PRU, there's only one way, and that's out. It's very hard to reintegrate students to their mainstream schools. And so it makes absolute sense to have an arm of the PRU that is actually working actively with mainstream schools to improve relationships and keep those students in. The practicalities are a different matter, because pupil referral system is always busier and more oversubscribed than it can manage, and it's very difficult for them to target staff and time and expertise to mainstream schools. It's just less of a priority than managing their own day-to-day running.
Okay, but now we've got a new head starting, Matt, in a month or so. Who are the people who are going to be? Who are the people? Is it, you know, Malcolm? Is it you? Is it Kerry? Who are the people who kind of start these conversations going, so we can have a more long-term solution? Because, as has already been alluded to, this seems like firefighting, and, you know, just trying to kind of put sticking plasters over a service that is not being funded properly. And I acknowledge what everybody else has said, that it actually is an important service. You don't need it until you do need it. So it would be worth having a much more longer term strategy to deal with this. And it would make sense that these conversations should take place with the new structure that is in place with the new head.
David, that makes absolute sense, and that would be the role that Les Knight should take. And if the behaviour support service had more capacity, then it would be very easy to negotiate some agreement between the PRU and the behaviour support team to work in both areas. Working with, so for example, I'm not saying this will happen, but the behaviour support teachers could be working with students in the PRU to ease their re-engagement to school, for example. That's something that the PRU staff don't have the time to do, but which we recognise in some limited cases, there are students who are ready to go back and, you know, just don't go back. And so, yeah, that would be another arm for the behaviour support service if they had the capacity.
Okay, well, rather than take up more time here, we do have a management committee meeting next Wednesday. So I can raise the issue there, and hopefully we can get some conversations going. Thank you for your answers.
Okay, thank you, Cameron, for answering those questions and clarifying some of those details for us. Malcolm, can I come back to you, please?
Mute.
Yeah, I think Rose still has her hand up for a question.
Oh, sorry. Rose, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, you mentioned, Cameron, that there was an early years project and a line to this. Is that for early years in schools, or is that for all settings, private and voluntary and everything else?
I'm not certain, but I think it's for preschoolers, reception age, and year one. It may go up to year two, but I know for a fact that they have a preschool. They have some preschoolers on their books in nurseries, and I think those are private providers. But they also have year one's reception children. I do think it might go to year two as well.
Can I just add to that, Cameron? I think it might only go to year two if the child has already been earmarked earlier, but that's my experience. Okay. But yeah, so I know when I've used it in the past, it's been for under fives, but it could continue when they become 6, as long as they've already been part of the project.
Okay. But that's available for everybody then?
That is available for everyone, and that time has been top sliced before we look at the time that you can increase and buy into. So that will carry on, and that's being funded, I think, centrally from Les Knight and the high needs budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody else? I can't see anybody else's hand up. Okay, thank you for all of that information. It's been really helpful. Malcolm will return to.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. I'll just carry on very quickly. The proposal for the behaviour support team is that there are two options included on the questionnaire that will go out to schools. Those responses are due back the middle of November, and then all of the delegation will go to the budget working group in December for a discussion. And clearly the discussion we've had here about the behaviour support service will be part of that discussion in December, and then it will come back to the schools forum in January for a decision about delegation. The proposal on the table in the consultation document is that there is an option for delegation at £4 a pupil, which will produce £37,500 for the support behaviour support service, and we will match that from the high needs budget. So that will produce £75,000 for the behaviour support service, which basically, as Cameron says, is the entry level to provide financial viability. The other option is for £5.25 per pupil delegation, which will produce £50,000 income, which will be matched from the high needs budget. So that will produce £100,000 for the behaviour support service, which will provide a modest expansion to the service. Just so that everybody is well aware that delegation is essentially a deduction from local authority maintained school budgets approved at source by Schools Forum to transfer to the behaviour support service. The behaviour support service is one of the approved services by the DFE for which delegation can be permitted. So this is all for further discussion in the budget working group and Schools Forum. We've probably heard enough about the behaviour support service. So I think, Cameron, thank you very much, and go off to your other business, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that's been useful, and I'll carry on with the rest of the budget, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Right, okay.
So back to the funding formula update.
Yes. I have a slideshow which captures the main points of the consultation paper, both for the Herefordshire Schools consultation and the draft response to the DFE's consultation paper. The budget working group supported the schools consultation paper when we met last Friday. And as I said, we've since added the behaviour support question to the consultation paper, not to make a decision, but in order to get school views for a further discussion at the BWP. I'll go through the summary of the consultation paper. Paul, would you like to add something now, or after I've gone through the summary at the end? As suits you, really.
Well, no, I was just going to say, we had our usual level of discussion and debate about each of these points, but I think as Malcolm said, we agreed that this should be brought forward to Schools Forum, and I think we just say that we're looking forward to a lively and informed debate when we next meet as a result of the discussions that we've already had this morning. I don't think I need to say any more at this point, Malcolm, so I'll let you continue, and thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of the budget group.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, right. Okay, I'll share the screen then. Slideshow. Right, okay, I trust everybody
Yes.
clearly.
Good.
The DFE national proposals for the national funding formula fit in with what they published a couple of years ago about budget increases to school. There's a 3.2% national increase, which comes down to a 2.8% increase per pupil. Most of the national funding formula core factors will go up by 3%. Of particular note to Herefordshire schools is that as per a previous consultation in the summer term, the DFE will use the road distance to work out the sparsity distance rather than the previous as the crow flies, and that will give significant extra funding up to £55,000 to 9 extra Herefordshire small primary schools. The cost of that is about 300,000, and at the moment I think I can cover that from within the growth fund. So that is good news for Herefordshire for the national funding formula. Built into the national funding formula is also extending the English as an additional language factor for pupils who qualify over a 3-year period. We've previously only funded for a 1-year period, and now we'll fund for a 3-year period. There's an extra cost to that of about £100,000, and that is also built into the budget we've got. The high needs budget at a national level has increased by just under 10%, and that is about the 3rd year running for which the high needs budget has had significant increases of 10% or more. And since we met at the budget working group last week, I've had a growth funding calculator from the DFE, which suggests that the forecast for the growth funding we get, which is on top of the national funding formula funding, will be £600,000. I was previously taking a more conservative view of that, and I have updated the school's consultation paper to include the new £600,000. Those are the broad outline of the DFE's funding. That is, as a summary, is included in the consultation paper for Herefordshire schools. Our proposals for Herefordshire schools in broad terms are we will fully fund the national funding formula values so that schools will get the full amount of the national funding formula. We are looking to continue with the growth funding for another year of the 10 places agreed for Fairfield and the 30 places agreed for Kingston. So those will roll through the 5 years of increased admissions. We are looking to continue to transfer funding from the high needs block to fund the SEN protection scheme. That will be with any funding that remains after we have met the full value of the national funding formula. And ideally, if there is any surplus at the end of this in the high needs budget, I would look to top up the reserves, which are every year our DSG reserves seem to diminish and get ever closer to a deficit. And if possible, I would like to put something back. We will be aiming for a balanced high needs budget. I expect an extra £2 million in the budget from the 9.6% increase. A lot of that is going to go on increased costs at independent special schools. We will be looking to put inflation on top-up funding with particular a higher increase on the top-up values D to F, so that special schools get an inflation increase on top of their place funding, their static place funding. I need to get a fix on Beacon College costs, particularly so that when we respond to the Education Funding Agency for commissioned places in future, we have an accurate figure to give them in November. And we have also agreed as part of the PRU restructuring that we will cover the TLR protection for 3 years. And whilst the PRU continues to operate on 2 sites, we will give a split site working allowance. All of this is set out in the consultation paper in detail.
I've got a question from Nikki. Mark.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to take it now. Yeah.
Nikki.
Hi, Malcolm. Sorry, it's really, really pertinent to me and probably not many other people here. Today is the final day of the consultation over the closure of my sixth form. No response has been given to us about trends. Have your forecasts regarding any of this taken into account the continuation or otherwise of my sixth form?
The high needs budget that's included in the consultation paper is a provisional budget, and we will be looking to finalise that between now and March. And I am aware that there are potentially costs that come from supporting Westfield through the closure of the sixth form process. Whilst your number of places is reduced, you have to maintain the staff to continue to provide that the extra sixth form until closure. I haven't included those in detail, Nikki. I was waiting until the end of the consultation, but I did. Sue Woodrow asked me for some figures in the summer term, and I've given Sue those figures, and it's an item that we will need to come back to once we know what the future holds. So thank you for raising it. With the minutes in Schools Forum, we'll make sure it's not forgotten.
But I need a clarification that it hasn't been agreed either way yet, yeah?
Sorry, the clarification on what?
That it isn't necessarily a done deal that we're closing.
No, I absolutely. I mean, if the consultation on closure of the sixth form proceeds, that it happens, then I will build the money that's necessary to support that into the budget. Yeah, I mean, I gave Sue Woodrow that assurance, and I believe she passed that on to Eric, the Chair of Governors.
She hasn't passed anything on to us, but that makes no difference. No, that's, and I just want everybody to know that Beacon, you know, the implications to Beacon will obviously be impacted either way within that high needs budget, because if we don't close, then we maintain our sixth form, but Beacon is still funded for 60 pupils. So it's just ongoing thing.
Thank you, Nikki, for that question, and Malcolm for that clarification.
Right, okay. So back to the schools block for mainstream schools. You can see that the cost of the national funding formula, I think, will give us 100,000, which I am reserving to cover the cost of increases in free school meals in October. And then, as in previous years, from the growth fund, I expect to have about 600,000 remaining outside of that. And I will be looking to transfer funding at the 0.5% to support the SEN protection scheme and to cover the costs of growth in the Golden Valley. The cost of the SEN protection scheme, where we provide extra funding to those schools that have higher than average numbers of pupils in receipt of high needs top-ups, continues to increase. Last year we spent 388,000. This year my forecast is about 440,000, and next year I expect it will increase by another up to 50,000. So again, that is something we'll need to come back to with the budget working group when we finalise the high needs budget. I've already talked about the road distance for sparsity for 9 small primary schools. That should be now covered in the budget plans that we have. We've talked at some length about the proposal for dedelegation to support the behaviour service. That is in the consultation paper. And again, once we get the feedback from schools about dedelegation, we'll come back to that. I also just need to make School Forum aware that included in the dedelegation is the the ongoing requirement for schools to support the school budgeting software. And the council is just about to extend the contract for a further 2 years. And so I will put a little sentence in the consultation paper that makes that commitment clear to schools. The high needs proposal, the budget is set out as we have in previous years in the the school budget consultation. You can see there some of the costs. The one thing that I am not clear about are the Beacon College places and the cost of that. And as Nikki says, that could vary depending on what the outcome of the Westfield consultation is. I would like to put some money back into balances if possible, but again, there is further work to be done on this, and I'd just like to draw Schools Forum's attention to the top line, which says at the moment we are currently forecasting an overspend of 144,000 on the high needs budget for this year, most of which is due to further increases in the use of independent special school places, which is about 500,000 more than the budget already. The budget proposals for next year will add 750,000 to independent special schools, and that should just about cover the extra cost. So it continues to be a concern. Yeah, that's probably where I would want to stop on the Herefordshire Schools budget consultation. Just to remind you that it is the same process as last year. It is a consultation. We will come back to the budget working group and Schools Forum when we know how much money the DFE are giving us in grant, which they announce in December. So all of this is very much work in progress, but the broad shape of it will not change from what I've shown today. I'm happy to take any questions, whether Paul wants to add any more after seeing the summary. Over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this? And Paul, did you want to add anything? No.
No, thank you.
I've got reduced view of images, but I can't see. Could you please speak if you want to raise any questions for Malcolm?
No, I don't see any hands raised either, Chair, so we're fine.
Okay. Before we go on to voting for that, could I ask the clerk to comment on the future role of the Schools Forum?
I can do, Chair. Malcolm, did you want to go through the responses at this point to the consultation?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. There is an appendix in the DFE consultation paper that actually sets out what the DFE how they are intending to change the role of Schools Forum. I think it's Appendix B in the Appendix 3 of the DFE paper. I mean, we might want to come back to that, and I can quickly run through that, Chair.
Yeah, I've got a few notes on that, Malcolm, so I can sort of cover that off at the end. I just didn't know whether you wanted to go through the other responses I'd quite first.
Yeah, okay.
Just finish your presentation and then we can take that down.
Right, okay, yeah, right. So if everybody's content with this as work in progress where we are, I'll move on. The DFE attached to the Schools Forum papers was a significant paper from the DFE, which was about 50 or 60 pages long, which was setting out what the DFE intend to do to move from the current state of national funding formula, which is advice from the DFE and agreed locally or not agreed locally by schools forums and local authorities. The DFE's long-term intention has always been that it should be a hard formula applied from Whitehall with no further local discretion. As such, question 1 says, do you agree that the national funding formula should be applied directly from Whitehall on the basis of a hard formula without any local adjustment? The response agreed with the budget working party we would say yes to that. The national funding formula has been good for Herefordshire schools since it was first mooted 10 years ago. Schools have seen increases in funding. We have had extra money, and And I had some figures that somewhere 10 years ago, from our family of statistical neighbours, we were 7th out of the 11 family of neighbours 10 years ago in terms of funding. We are now 1st out of those family of statistical neighbours, and that has been largely due to the national funding formula and the extra money that we have received along the way to bring us up to the funding that we needed. So I think the national funding formula has been positive for Herefordshire, and we would support that. The second question was about premises funding, which is one area the national funding formula doesn't yet cover, particularly private finance initiative costs, exceptional circumstances, and split sites. The DfE are not clear how they are going to do this, and they have said there will be further work and further consultation, and the response is set out on the slide in front of us. But basically my concern would be about the affordability gap. The whole model we have assumes inflation at about 3%, and the PFI scheme is affordable. In the news in recent days, the forecast has been that inflation at the end of the year will be 4%. And if that inflation departs markedly from the 3% in the PFI planning model, it will start to cost the council significant money because of the affordability gap is clearly linked with inflation. So I will watch with interest how the DfE tend to do that, but further consultation is offered by the DfE. There is an argument that says PFI is so complicated, you might be better just leaving it outside the national funding formula until all those PFI contracts expire. I'm happy if anybody wants to chip in as we go through this, just sort of unmute and chip in, that would be helpful. Question 3 is about using standardised criteria to allocate aspects of growth and fall in roll funding. Yes, we support that. Question 4 says, do you have any comments? Yes, we just need, DfE needs to take care that what is regarded significant nationally does truly reflect what is significant locally. And there is a danger that the size of significance in rural areas is sort of overwhelmed by urban areas, and significance must in part relate to the unavailability of alternative places within easy travelling distances. So that's saying, yes, we're happy, but we have some concerns about what significant actually means at a national level. Question 5 is about should each local authority use the national funding formula factors in its local formula? Yes, we should. We do that, and I believe others should do that. Question 6 is all local authorities should be required to move closer to the national funding formula to smooth that transition. Yes, I believe they should. There are still some authorities that for reasons of their own reasons are not adopting the national funding formula. Something like 73 local authorities out of 150 apply the national funding formula to their own schools, and another 20 or so apply it within affordability considerations. There are still probably a third of authorities that are not moving towards the national funding formula, and the DfE view is they should be forced to do that. Otherwise, the hard formula will never be implemented. Question 7 is the same about, yes, those authorities that are not on the national funding formula should move 10% closer, and that would seem a reasonable strategy. Question 8 is about what threshold should apply to those authorities that mirror the national funding formula. We mirror the national funding formula. I just wonder about the practice we've had in the past of giving schools extra money, welcome though it is. We will continue to do that, but I just wonder whether that might cause some problems with the DFE in future. And we are restricted in terms of our use of schools block funding. So the very few options we have mostly include giving the extra money to schools. DFE need to think more about that. EAL factor, yes, that should be adopted by everybody, by all local authorities as we move to the national funding formula. Question 10 about sparsity. Yes, some flexibility to that is useful, particularly if rural authorities like us are not able to fully fund the move. Some flexibility will be useful. I believe we will fully fund it, and so it's not necessary for us to use those flexibility, but we probably need them. Question 11 is about the central school services block, which is a relatively small block for us. It's about £690,000, and most of that goes on statutory services, admissions, central licenses for schools, and we have not a great deal of discretion in how that's spent. That could be moved into the traditional local government funding arrangement without any great loss for ourselves. A number of local authorities have historic costs which they have used the central services block to fund mainly prudential borrowing and also enhanced retirement provisions, which are both our long-term costs that could run for 25 years or more. The DFE proposal is to give a legacy grant to replace that. I can see the sense of doing that, but I'm not sure it's a fair way of proceeding. I missed. Yeah, okay. Question 13 was about the possibility of moving maintained schools on to being funded on an academic year basis. When I asked the budget working group, that was strongly supported by all schools on the budget working group. The only disadvantage that we can see would fall on the local authority, which is myself, where we would potentially have to split our financial payments to schools so that schools receive payments for the period April to August and also September to March separately, which is what we currently try to do with academies to tie in with their financial year processes to make it clear and easy. That is not a lot of difficulty for the local authority, and it may be that the advantages of funding maintained schools on an academic year basis are much more significant than what are relatively small disadvantages. Question 15, have we any comments on beyond the equalities impact of the DFE? And no comment. Question 16 says, any further comments? The legacy grant, I think I've mixed feelings about, because those authorities that receive the benefits of new school buildings and better retirement settlements for school staff, though that was agreed with their schools forum and schools, and that reduced the funding to schools, and they made a conscious decision they wanted those benefits and they would accept a reduced level of funding to schools. Under the national funding formula, those authorities now, those schools will get their full entitlement to the national funding formula, which is right and proper. However, the authority still gets the benefits from new schools from prudential borrowing and better retirement settlements, and it's going to be paid for by government. I sort of feel that maybe Herefordshire could have done that if we'd have so wished 20 years ago. We chose not to. and that those local authorities should continue to pay a small contribution, maybe 25% of the cost for the benefits they continue to receive. I think you have a different view if you've got the historic costs and they're unavoidable. I think authorities with those historic costs are very clearly say 100% in favour of the legacy grant. I think if you don't have those costs, then you sort of have a different perception of fairness. That I think is the end of the proposed response. I'll stop sharing the response and we can have a discussion if need be. Yeah, I think it's within all of these consultations from the DFE, Herefordshire response carries small weight nationally. We have contributed to the F40 response, and usually what happens is the DFE do what they were intending to do anyway. If there's any questions or any amendments, the response has to be submitted by the 30th of September. So either members can let me know by email separately or just let me know now.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm, for that extensive explanation and slides. We've got a question from Chris Lewandowski. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Right, this is going to be quite long. DFE consultation, fair funding for all, completing reforms to the national funding formula. In the foreword to the consultation paper, Nick Gibb, ex-Minister for Schools, states, the government is committed to levelling up opportunities across the country and education lies at the heart of that mission. Final allocations set directly by a single national formula will mean all schools within a multi-academy trust will be funded on a consistent basis, regardless of which local authority they happen to be located in. In the introduction to the paper, it states, we need to distribute it through a funding system that is fair for all pupils and schools, no matter where they are in the country. The school's NFF saw the Department for Education moving to calculate schools' funding allocations based upon the characteristics and needs of each school and its pupils. On page 11, it states, fair. Each mainstream school should be funded on the same basis, wherever it is in the country, and every child should be given the same opportunities based upon a consistent assessment of needs. Moving to a hard NFF will mean that it will no longer be the case that two schools which are fundamentally similar intakes and circumstances can be allocated significantly different funding simply due to being located in different LAs. These are all fine words which sound very good. Unfortunately, they are misleading to say the least, and they are not true. Why, you ask? Well, if you look on page 53 of the consultation paper, there is the area cost adjustments, which most people seem to ignore. The area cost adjustment reflects the variation in the general labour market GLM costs across the country, taking into account general market trends. It should be remembered that teachers in England are very largely paid on a national pay scale, and that with the exception of London and its fringes, a teacher on M1 in Herefordshire is paid the same as an M1 teacher in any other English local authority. The paper states nationally the ACA ranges between 1.00 and 1.18. What does this mean? Well, as I understand it, this means that similar schools in different local authorities could be funded with a difference of 18% in their budgets. So where is the levelling up or fairness in that? Now, Herefordshire is a beautiful county to live in. It has many apples, potatoes and chickens, but it is a low-wage economy, a very low-wage economy. In the general labour market, it will score very poorly. in the local authority league tables for ACA scores, you can guess where Herefordshire is likely to come. I believe that for true levelling up and fairness, the ACA for all local authorities outside of London and its fringes should be equal. Apart from this, there is a lot of good about the NFF. I note in the draft responses in Appendix 4 from Herefordshire and Herefordshire Schools Forum to the consultation, I further note that the responses make no mention or comment upon the area cost adjustment. I believe that not to comment upon the inequality and unfairness of the ACA is a gross disservice to the people of Herefordshire and, in particular, the children and future children of the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Malcolm, would you have any comments to make?
I would, yes. I think the area cost adjustment, I mean, Chris is right when he says that, teachers on national scales outside of London. The area cost adjustment is the first attempt by the DfE to actually provide some objectivity to what the cost, how costs vary from authorities nationally. The vast bulk of authorities get 0% added as area costment terms. Those typically London authorities now receive significantly less funding under the national funding formula using the objectivity of the area cost adjustment. It has long been the case previously that the highest funded schools in London, in Tower Hamlets and Hackney, receive twice as much on a per pupil basis than authorities like Herefordshire. The national funding formula is intended to reduce those differentials, and perhaps what I would like to do is talk to Chris offline. I could send him the area cost adjustment values that show a significant reduction to London authorities, where I think their costs in the area cost adjustment are typically sort of 30 to 35% for inner London authorities. I mean, clearly they have extra costs in terms of rates, in terms of staffing, in terms of contracts, and many of the costs, as you all know, if you go up to London, the prices you paid for food and drink in London is typically, it can be twice as much as what it is in Herefordshire. And I think it's quite right that the standard of education provided to a child in London should be the same as what it is in Herefordshire. And to do that, you have to factor in the extra costs for the that schools bear that doesn't relate to teaching provision. I think the national funding formula for Herefordshire has been good. I think the idea behind it is good. There is an example in the DfE's consultation paper that shows very clear differences of significant amounts between authorities, and I can just find it. It's in Appendix 3 at the beginning. There is a table on what is effectively page 38 of the Schools Forum. Right. It gives many examples of, for example, a small primary school with low deprivation in Medway gets £260,000 for its budget. The average for the local authority mean average local authority funding is 322,000, and the highest funding for London is 361. And for some reason, North East Lincolnshire also give 361,000 for a small local primary school. That table goes through medium primary schools. So you look at a large secondary school with high deprivation in Kent, the budget is 5.7 million. Typically, the national funding average is 6.1 million. In Hackney, that school would get 7 million. So that table shows quite wide variations in budget. And I think from memory, when I looked at this, and we looked at it in the budget working group, and I have a slide that showed typically the difference between the highest and the smallest was about somewhere between 10 and 15%. It seems to me that the national funding formula should provide an equivalence of funding for schools with the same catchment characteristics. What the area cost adjustment attempts to do is then apply an additional funding to reflect the local costs that are incurred by schools in higher cost areas. The DFE consulted widely about use of the area cost adjustment when they first introduced the national funding formula proposal some 5 years ago, and it's really outside of the remit of this funding consultation, although it would be open to us to put comments in question 16. I probably would suggest to Schools Forum that I have a discussion with Chris further about the use of the area cost adjustment. I believe it is not as unfair, far from it, as what Chris suggests, and actually it is a attempt to deal with what is a complex picture by objective means, and maybe it's something we can look at the budget working group, look at the area cost adjustment, and then come back to Schools Forum with a more considered view when we've had time to think about it more fully. I hope that's at least a partial answer to Chris's views, and I would welcome that discussion in a more detailed forum.
Chris, would you like to comment on that? And
yes, I would like to comment, Chair. First of all, I agree, London and its fringes are a different case, and they do need extra because of certain things. But I'm not talking about London. I'm talking about, say, Sussex or Oxfordshire. And the additional school costs, electricity is going up everywhere, but the same costs in Herefordshire and Sussex and Oxford for electricity. Minimum wage, it's the same across. There should be equality between other local authorities, not London and the fringes, but the other local authorities is where there should be levelling up and equality, and there isn't. It would be interesting to see, as Malcolm suggests, the full list of area cost adjustment factors for all the other local authorities. And last time I looked, there were significant differences, and that is what I'm concerned about. Thank you.
thank you. David, could we hear from you, please?
Thank you. As someone who worked in North East Lincolnshire in Grimsby and in London, I take what Malcolm says, but thank you for Chris for raising that point. It just made me think. In London, the fringe and the outer fringe and central London costs are mainly, yes, okay, there's additional rents and so forth, but a lot of that is passed on to the wages that are paid for teachers. Okay, now this out of area cost adjustment, I can understand if it's deprivation issues where you're paying for extra resources to come into schools like behaviour support services and so forth. But what I don't understand is if it's a higher cost of living, and therefore you have to try and kind of encourage people in. So somewhere like Oxford is a very expensive place to live. Oh, and by the way, Malcolm, in London, the majority of the money is for housing, rent, and so forth. The actual eating out and stuff is not that much expensive. It's fine. So in terms of the higher cost of living, what is the mechanism for schools to pay additional money to staff? Because there's a national pay formula, so your main scale and your upper pay scale, I can't see how schools are able to transfer the extra funding into people's pay packets. So I think what Chris is saying has a lot of merit, and we need to take that on board quite seriously in terms of how we respond to this what's the word, survey or whatever we're getting from the DfE.
Malcolm.
Yeah, I mean, I take that on board. Thank you, David. I think it's a complex issue, and I would like to sort of look at it in more detail with where we can have a discussion at the budget working group and see whether we think it's fair and reasonable or not, on the basis of you know, some actual facts and figures and understanding what the DfE are actually doing. I mean, there's been long-standing debates about the area cost adjustment, and I know when I worked in Gloucestershire did not get the area cost adjustment. Oxfordshire did, but it was mainly for those schools on the London fringe of Oxfordshire. But it was common for head teachers to say, if my school was half a mile over the border, I'd get £300,000 more than what I do currently. And I think the area cost adjustment is an attempt to simplify and make objective something that has been a long-standing problem. And let's have a look at it at the budget working group and come back to forum with a proper considered fact and figures, and have a debate on some on scientific grounds, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Paul, your question, please.
Can I just support what Chris has said, support what Malcolm has said? There should be a discussion about it. The area cost adjustment is they say everybody should be equal, and then they put in another factor then, which makes some people not all equal. And this is the area cost adjustment. What it doesn't take into account, and it should take into account, is rural deprivation. That's the one issue I don't think it covers in any great detail. And the other thing which is of interest, I think, is the new Minister for Schools is Robin Walker, who's Peter Walker's son, who is from Worcester. So actually, that may be helpful to actually promote, or seek to get some more understanding of what it's like living in rural Herefordshire. And actually, we've got needs, and that should be taken into account, and we should get additional funding like others, and we should put a special case in for that. But I agree with Malcolm. Let's have a particular discussion at another forum, and then come back with some proposals. That seems eminently sensible. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Before I come to you, Chris, I'd just like to intervene. Sarah has brought it to my attention that a couple of people have left as the meeting's gone on quite late, and we risk not being quorate if other people leave. So we do need to press on. Chris, if I could come to you then briefly.
Right, very briefly. Fine, let's have another discussion about the area cost adjustment. But if you want to put a response in the consultation paper, it's due by the 30th of September. So time is very tight for that consultation if you want to put a comment in, which I think we ought to.
Thank you for that, pointing that out to us as well. Sarah Clark. So let's, where are we on our, have we changed anything in the consultation that needs any proposing or seconding, or are we ready to go on and vote?
I don't believe we necessarily need to do that unless anyone wants to support Chris's proposal to include something in the response about the area cost adjustments.
Okay,
and
or
whether
are
we want
we
to
ready?
leave that to Malcolm to come up with a suitable wording.
Okay, or are we ready to
Once he's
take?
had will you be able to have a conversation with Chris, Malcolm, you know, in
Yes,
the next day or two before that has to go back?
Yes, I think so. If Chris would like to drop me an email, sort of setting out some of his points that he's raised today, I'll have a discussion with him, and perhaps Schools Forum could leave it to my judgment as to what we.
Fine. Okay, so we are ready to take the recommendations as follows. A, that the initial budget proposals for 2022-23 for schools and high needs be approved for consultation with schools during the autumn term. And B, the budget working group's proposed response to the DFE consultation paper be approved for submission by the due date of the 30th of September. Please cast your vote and press the submit button. If you cannot see the voting screen or are unable to vote, please raise your hand. So Clark, if you could please bring up the voting screen.
I will do that. David, did you have a question before I?
Yeah, yes, please. I think the second thing about the survey that Malcolm's doing, the first bit's fine, but the second one, I think there's some unanswered questions there that if Malcolm and Chris are going to have that conversation, I feel uncomfortable actually having a vote when I don't have all the information.
Did somebody else have, Steve, did you have a question? What's that? No. Okay, so does that mean we need to?
I think it's the phrasing of the question because of this conversation. It's not that we approve what Malcolm has said. We approve that Malcolm will put forward an adjusted set of recommendations based on his conversation with Chris. Because otherwise, in the records we're going to have a false vote.
And I am happy to have a discussion with Chris and come up with a form of words that I then agree with as chair of Schools Forum today.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but that is the wording of this question.
Yeah.
I know I trust you implicitly, Malcolm, but it's the wording of this question, obviously.
That's fine. So I think if we say then the recommendation B is that the response to the DFE consultation paper will be as set out in the papers, but with amendments with relation to the points that were to be discussed between Malcolm and Chris, and the final text then to be agreed by Cathy as the chair of the forum.
And are we all comfortable with that wording to go ahead and vote?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That should be on screens now.
Thank you, Sarah.
And that has been unanimously approved.
Thank you, Clark. That's lovely. Okay, thank you everybody for that discussion and voting. So we now go to item 6, local management of schools scheme amendments. Please note that only members of the forum who represent a local authority maintained school may vote on this item. Are we still quorate for that, Sarah?
I think Paul has dropped off, but I know he was having some connections problems, so he might reappear in just a moment.
In the meantime, then, if we could ask Malcolm to update the forum on the required change. Thank you, Malcolm.
Very briefly, we've been asked by the DFE to include 2 amendments to the local management of schools scheme for authority maintained schools. The first one is to include in the scheme of delegation that schools should or must submit a 5-year budget plan when they submit their governor's budget plans to the local authority each year. The DfE asked us to include a 3-year budget plan. I believe 5 years is more useful. It also reflects current practice, and the budget plans automatically come out of the school budgeting software, so the extra 2 years do not require any great work on behalf of schools, and they are actually usefully pick up trends in across the 5-year period. The second one is that schools with a deficit in excess of 5% should be required to produce a deficit recovery plan. We only have one local authority school with a deficit. That deficit is about 0.1%, so it wouldn't apply. And again, that just reflects current practice. Both of those changes were trailed around schools in Spotlight. I was asked for comments. I received no comments. I regard them just as formalising current practice and not a big issue for Schools Forum. So your agreement would be most welcome. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to put a question to Malcolm?
Thank you, Chair. 5-year plans are fine. It would be useful, though, however, if we knew what inflation was going to be like over those 5 years and how much the government was going to allow teachers to be paid over those 5 years, neither of which we know.
Thank you for drawing our attention to those facts and those queries. Malcolm, would you say anything in response?
Well, I mean, we generally give advice to schools on what to apply in the 5-year plan. Typically, we apply our own view of Julie Davis gives us views of what teachers pay and local authority staff non-teachers pay will be, and we apply that into the 5-year plan, and we make some assumptions that that will be matched by the increased funding from the DfE and the national funding formula. So I think it's a reasonable assumption to say that if teachers' pay goes up by 2%, the DfE is obliged to put 2% into the national funding formula. Clearly, over the 5-year period, there are opportunities in future years to adjust that if necessary. What it does do is very clearly identify those schools that have a big gap between their income and their expenditure, and we can talk to those schools about taking action to rectify that. So it's a very useful tool, and one of the reasons I believe that Herefordshire schools have so few schools in deficit and are so well managed financially is we put a lot of time and effort into this, and schools respond very positively with the 5-year budget plans, and it allows us to address very early on those schools with financial problems. You look around the country, there are many more schools with deficits and financial problems, and they're not dealt with well at all. So I think Herefordshire should be proud of what we do on this. So I take Chris's point. Inflation, nobody knows what inflation will be. At the moment it's going up. We also have the national insurance 1.25% supplement, which will apply to schools. I believe I have read that the government intend to add cover to that, to the national funding formula, but I've not seen anything in writing. I've just heard sort of ministers say that will be the case. So there are always lots of unknowns in the budget plans, but on balance, I would rather have them than not. Thank you.
I would just like to say that I find the 5-year budget very helpful. and then it's reviewed annually, and we know where we're going. We can see what's on the horizon. And we've been working in that way for some time already. Chris, did you have anything to come back on there?
Yes, please, Chair.
Thank you.
I would like to compliment Malcolm on all the work he does in keeping schools sober. I know it's not an easy job. I know he puts a lot of time in it, and he does a very, very good job. So congratulations, Malcolm.
And I would add to that I think that's the reason we are not in deficit budgets, is because we don't want to incur the wrath of Malcolm. Paul, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, just to echo what's been said, I know Malcolm's team are incredibly helpful to schools to talking about budgets, and I mean they talk about it warts and all. So I think it's incredibly important that that advice is given and acted upon. So I think actually there's no surprises, and if there are surprises, then they have to be actioned. So I think it's a very good system within Herefordshire. And again, thanks to Malcolm and his team for all the support that they give to schools.
Hear, hear. Okay, Malcolm, would you like to go through anything else before we? Sorry. Malcolm, would you like to continue with anything before we vote?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I thought I'd unmuted myself. No, I've nothing else to add. I think the recommendations are straightforward. They're not contentious. And I think they're largely supported by Schools Forum.
So the recommendations are that the statutory amendments to the local management of schools scheme of delegation be approved as follows. A, revision to paragraph 2.3.1 little a. Each school must submit a 5-year budget forecast each year by the 1st of June. In exceptional circumstances, this may be extended to the 30th of June on request. B, 4.9, licensed deficits and recovery plans. New paragraph 4.9b, schools must submit a recovery plan to the local authority when their revenue deficit rises above 5% at 31st of March of any year. The 5% deficit threshold will apply when deficits are measured as at the 31st of March 2021. I remind you that only schools members may vote on this item. Any member who does not represent an LA maintained school should abstain at the vote. Clark, if you'd like to, we've got a question from Lynn first.
Yes, could you just clarify whether the position I'm substituting for is entitled to vote or not, please?
Yes, you are, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Clark, if you'd like to bring up the voting screen, please.
Right, that should be on screens now. There we go. Thank you. That's been carried, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Item 7, annual review of Schools Forum membership. Clark, you were going to talk a little bit about this. Could you update us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Right, so I'll be brief because I know we've gone on a bit this morning. So this is the required annual review to ensure the split of seats between academies and local authority schools remains proportionate to the numbers of pupils in those schools. The latest calculation was based on January 2021 census figures and doesn't indicate any need to change the current allocation of seats on either the forum or the working group.
Thank you.
So the recommendations are in simply that be noted and that there are no changes required.
Thank you. So no questions. The recommendations are as follows. The outcome of the annual review of proportionality is noted and no changes are made to the allocation of seats on Herefordshire Schools Forum or the Budget Working Group. Would you like to please cast your vote when that comes up on the screen?
Thank you, Chair. That's been carried.
Thank you. Clark? Thank you everybody for your vote. Item 8, dates of future meetings and work programme. If I could call on Clark again to give us an update, please.
I will do, Chair. Thank you. And yeah, we've concluded all the voting business now. So yeah, if anyone does drop off, I don't think we need to be too concerned about that at this point. So yes, the dates and work programme for the rest of this academic year. Obviously, this meeting was, in a sense, carried forward from last year. We deferred the July meeting, hoping that we would have some information to share with you on the SEN review, but as that's turned out, we haven't. In order to get us back on track, we are required by regulations to have 4 meetings a year. We would normally have an October meeting, but the primary purpose of that is to agree the consultation paper, which we've dealt with today. So I don't particularly see any need to have an October meeting this year, but I am suggesting that we perhaps look to schedule a meeting in December, which we have had in the past, with the hope that with the SEN review, hopefully due to be published in November, we will have some initial comments to share with you on that, and we can pick up any other emerging information as regards the funding formula for next year. So we'd be looking at that probably for the 10th of December, which would follow on from the budget working group meeting, which is scheduled for the 3rd. We would then be looking at our usual January meeting on the 14th of January to approve the funding formula for 2022-23. There would then be the usual March meeting on the 18th of March to consider the high needs budget proposals. And then finally a summer term meeting on the 15th of July to pick up any emerging information about 22-23.
Thank you, Sarah, and they'll all appear in the minutes of this meeting, so we'll be able to transfer them to our diaries. Thank you. Paul, a question?
Yeah, first of all, can I say I agree entirely with what Sarah has said, and I think it's just an opportunity, I think, to thank you, Kathy, for your chairing today, which has been excellent, and to thank Sarah for all the paperwork, thank Malcolm for all his input as well, and also to thank the Budget Working Party, particularly Paul, for chairing that. I just wondered if the question I was going to ask is, are we looking to have virtual meetings for those meetings, Sarah, or are we looking to have them actual? I mean, or is that a discussion to be had, say, in December?
Thank you.
It probably is a discussion for December. The regulations now allow us to meet wholly virtually, so it's entirely a choice for the forum going forward. I think when we raised it previously, the feedback was very positive about the virtual format and the time saving, etc. And I think we've noted that attendance is better with the virtual setup. That's not to say that we can't mix and match. So if we wanted to hold a physical meeting on a particular occasion to get everyone together, we can do that. But I think certainly the feedback I've had would be that the default option, shall we say, would be an online meeting in this format.
I mean, the crucial thing for me is what's important for particularly the head teachers, because I think travelling into Herefordshire, into Hereford City for a meeting, takes out an entire morning or a day, and particularly with COVID, etc. So I think it probably, I'm very easy on whatever the options are, but I think we just need to be cognizant of the people who are working in schools, attending meetings. So whether we can do some sort of quick survey on that, or you can just ask people what would you like, and then we've got some evidence base then to say, yeah, well, let's go for next year, or virtual or blended or whatever. That's helpful. Thanks ever so much.
Yes,
Thank you, Paul.
I would agree with that, Paul.
And thank you for your comments. Malcolm.
Yes, I just did to remind Sarah before we left that we said we'd say something about the future of schools forum.
Yes, thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, I thought I'd come to that as well under this item. Yes, so we We mentioned before about the consultation document under item 5, and in there is an annex which sets out the proposed changes to the responsibilities of the forum under the hard national funding formula. Obviously, there are some elements which in the past the forum has had decision-making powers on that simply won't be an option under the hard formula, so those drop away. There are still some details to be worked through, notably in relation to SEN, and pending that announcements on that, the outcome of that review. But it does say quite clearly that DfE still see a role for a local forum. The term of membership for members is 3 years in Herefordshire, and the last round of recruitment was 2018, so I am due to do a refresher membership. I did hold off doing anything over the summer, just pending more information on what that future role at the forum was going to look like, so that we can do that with that information. But given the indications are that the forum will continue in some shape or form, I am proposing now to move forward and do a refresh of membership. We have 1 or 2 vacancies that we're carrying that we can look to fill in and just generally get some turnover. I'll write out to the nominating bodies with details on that in the next, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We'll continue to monitor any further guidance that comes out from the DfE in response to that consultation, and adapt our membership and constitution accordingly as that happens. Just like to take the opportunity to remind current members there's no limit on the number of terms you can serve, so if you want to put yourselves forward again, you're very welcome to do so. And equally, if you do have any colleagues you think would make good candidates for the forum, now would be a good time to talk to them about the work that we do and encourage them to put their hat in the ring when we come around, because we're seldom overwhelmed with volunteers for it. So anyone that we can encourage to participate as we go forward is very welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. I agree. I think a recruitment drive would be good, but thank you for all of that. Is there any other business? I'd just like to thank Sarah for all her hard work and support and efficient paperwork that she sends us out, and Malcolm for all of your input. It's been a lengthy morning, but a productive one, and I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. I will now call the meeting to a close. Please, can I have the confirmation that the live stream has stopped?